Michael thought he had the perfect life: successful business, a devoted wife, and a quiet routine. But when late-night church meetings didn't add up, he followed his instincts and uncovered a betrayal so deep it shook their entire community. What he did next turned whispers into shockwaves. Michael Jenkins had always believed that simplicity was the key to peace. At 42, he ran a neighborhood grocery store in Austin, Texas, inherited from his late father. He opened at dawn, closed by sunset, and knew most customers by name. His days were predictable, quiet, and for a long time, that suited him just fine. His wife Grace was known by nearly everyone in their part of town. A respected figure at St. Matthew's Church, she organized food drives, hosted prayer groups, and managed community events with a calm, unwavering presence. She was the kind of woman people looked up to, not just for her devotion to faith, but for her commitment to helping others. To anyone watching, theirs was a model marriage: stable, kind, generous. Michael had no reason to question anything. Grace's phone was left unlocked on counters. Her schedule revolved around community service. She was always out doing something for someone else. And Michael, a man who never considered himself suspicious by nature, accepted it all at face value. But things began to shift. Subtle at first. Grace started coming home later than usual. At first, it was small things: staying after church meetings to clean up, or dropping off donations to families in need. But then it became routine. Nights where she wouldn't be home until well after 10, sometimes closer to midnight. She always had an explanation, usually involving last-minute planning sessions or unexpected errands tied to church events. The stories made sense on the surface, but something in Michael resisted accepting them. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't paranoia. It was the stillness in the house on those nights, the silence that stretched too long, the feeling of sitting in the living room, wondering why his wife hadn't texted for hours. He asked her about it once casually. Grace had smiled and thanked him for being so understanding. Not many men would be okay with their wife being out late doing church work, she said, as if complimenting him for his patience. Michael nodded, said he trusted her, but her response echoed in his mind for days after. One night he called her at 8:45 p.m. She picked up quickly. "Still at the church," she said. "Big cleanup night. We're scrubbing the floors for the parish fundraiser. Should be another hour or so." He told her to take her time and ended the call like he always did. But this time, something pulled at him, a weight in his chest he couldn't explain. He locked up the store early and drove straight to St. Matthew's. The street was empty. The church parking lot had maybe one car, and none of the lights inside were on. Michael got out of his truck and walked around the building. Every door was locked. The windows were dark. He waited, pacing slowly, telling himself maybe they were in a different wing of the building or had finished early and carpooled home. But he knew better. After 30 minutes, he got back into his truck and sat there, staring at the church's dark silhouette. There was no sign Grace had ever been there. She came home after 11 p.m. that night, cheerful, exhausted, talked about how hard the scrubbing had been, how the bleach stung her hands, said the other women pitched in and they'd made great progress. She even laughed while describing how Sister Mary nearly slipped on the wet tiles. Michael listened, nodded at all the right moments. He said nothing about his trip to the church. He didn't accuse her. He didn't raise his voice. But his mind was racing. That night, Grace fell asleep within minutes. Michael lay beside her, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. His instincts were screaming now, and he couldn't ignore them any longer. He needed the truth, not guesses, not gut feelings. He wanted facts. So the next morning, he drove across town to a small, nondescript office just above a pawn shop. A plain brass plate read, "Charles Benson, Private Investigator." Charles looked like the kind of man who asked no questions unless he needed answers. Michael sat across from him and explained everything. Grace's late nights, her excuses, the empty church, the lingering doubt he couldn't shake. Charles listened silently, jotting notes. When Michael finished, he simply said, "I'll look into it. You'll hear from me soon." It wasn't much, but for Michael, it was a start. Over the next few days, Michael returned to his routine, but nothing felt normal. Grace continued to smile, cook, talk about church, plan another fundraiser. Her routine hadn't changed. But now every word she spoke felt like a test. Michael watched everything more closely. The time she left the house, the exact words she used, the sudden pauses before she answered simple questions. She never slipped, not once. But something inside Michael had already changed. He was no longer a man trying to ignore his doubts. He was a man waiting for confirmation, and confirmation was coming. 3 days later, the call came. Michael was in the back room of his store, sorting inventory when his phone rang. Charles Benson didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I need you to come by," he said. "I have what you're looking for." Michael didn't ask for details. He left the store as it was, handed the keys to his assistant manager, and drove across town without a word. The traffic blurred around him. All he could hear was Charles's voice repeating in his mind. The door to the office was ajar. Charles sat behind the same desk, his expression unchanged. On the table in front of him lay a thick envelope, sealed, heavy. "I'm not going to say much," Charles said. "What's in there? See for yourself." Michael took the envelope with steady hands, though every muscle in his body felt tense. He peeled it open and pulled out a stack of photographs. The first image stopped him cold. Grace, stepping out of a nondescript motel in South Austin, her arm brushing against a man's. A man Michael recognized instantly. Peter Lang, another fixture of St. Matthew's Church. The same man who always helped set up tables for Sunday brunches, who led prayer when the pastor was out of town. He was also married. The next few photos showed the same pattern. Peter and Grace arriving at the same motel on different nights, always just after dark. Different clothes, different days, same location. In one picture, they laughed as they got out of the car. In another, they lingered at the door, Peter holding it open as if it were a casual dinner date. One image had them standing close, too close, talking in a way that didn't need sound to explain. Charles spoke again. Dates, times, and matching motel logs are included. Same pattern. 4 times in the last 2 weeks, all when she claimed to be at church. Michael didn't respond. He stared at the evidence as if the air had been sucked out of the room. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the clarity, the routine, the ease with which Grace returned home afterward, telling stories about parish meetings and cleaning supplies. He placed the photos back into the envelope, nodded to Charles, and stood up. "You sure you're good?" Charles asked without emotion. "I am now," Michael said quietly, and walked out. Back in his truck, he didn't cry or scream. He just sat there, one hand resting on the envelope, the other gripping the steering wheel, eyes focused ahead. The truth was no longer abstract. It was printed in full color, documented down to the minute. He drove home, the envelope on the passenger seat. Grace was out again, at another meeting. He didn't call her. He didn't pace the floor or prepare a speech. Instead, he waited. At 9:30 p.m., he called her. She answered on the second ring, cheerful as ever. "Still at the church," as she said. "We're finishing up a last-minute meeting for Sunday's event. Shouldn't be long." "Take your time," Michael replied. "I'm just waiting out front." Silence. The pause stretched too long. Grace's voice, when it returned, was lighter, trying to sound casual. "Oh, well, I'm actually inside the back wing, so you probably can't see any lights. Why don't you run to the store? We're out of milk. Maybe pick up something for breakfast." "I'll wait here," Michael said. "Take your time." Another pause, then nothing. 10 minutes later, Grace appeared. Not from the church entrance, but from the rear alley that bordered the parking lot. She walked slowly, eyes on the ground. Michael watched her approach without getting out of the car. She opened the door and sat down beside him. No one spoke. Halfway home, she finally tried. "Michael, this isn't what it looks like. I was meeting with someone from the church, but..." He said nothing, just drove. When they were 2 blocks from home, he took the envelope from the seat and dropped it onto her lap. She opened it. One glance at the photos, and the facade collapsed. Her words came in gasps, mixed with apologies and broken explanations. Something about stress, feeling neglected, needing comfort, moments of weakness. She reached out, but Michael didn't flinch. His eyes stayed forward. When they reached the driveway, he parked, turned to her, and spoke with calm finality. "You have 1 hour. Pack your things. Leave this house." Then he stepped out and went inside. Grace didn't argue. She sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the pictures, then followed his order. An hour later, she was gone. Suitcases in hand, eyes red, mouth closed. Michael didn't look back. What he had built, years of trust, routines, shared plans, had been dismantled in a matter of days. But in that destruction, something else had emerged. Clarity. The lie was over. The uncertainty was gone. And Michael wasn't finished yet. The next morning, the house was quiet, but not in the same way it had been before. It wasn't just the absence of grace. It was the absence of deception. Michael moved through his kitchen with purpose. No more wondering. No more second-guessing. The truth was out. But the story wasn't over. He placed the envelope on the table one last time. Not for himself, for someone else. Amanda Lang, Peter's wife. She deserved to know everything, just like he had. Michael didn't need revenge. He didn't want drama or confrontation. But he believed in facts, and facts had to be faced. By late morning, he was parked outside the Lang's home in a quiet neighborhood a few miles from his own. The lawn was tidy, the porch swept. No one would guess that behind that clean appearance was a betrayal equal to the one that had torn apart his own home. He walked up the steps and knocked. Peter opened the door. His expression shifted the second he saw Michael. Surprise, discomfort, and something else. Panic. Before Peter could speak, Michael said one sentence, calm and precise. "I'd like to speak with your wife." Peter stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "Look, Michael." Amanda appeared behind him. "Is everything okay?" Michael met her eyes, then held out the envelope. "This is for you." She took it, confused. Peter tried to interject, but Michael had already turned and walked back to his truck. He didn't look back. By the time he reached home, Grace had already tried calling twice. He didn't answer. Her voice messages came minutes apart. One pleaded, one apologized. The third promised to explain everything, "if you'll just hear me out." He deleted them all without listening past the first few words. Later that evening, word spread through their church community. Amanda had thrown Peter out. Not after a fight, not after tears. She had simply handed him a suitcase, told him to leave, and closed the door behind him. Neighbors saw it happen. The story spread fast, and people filled in the blanks. Michael never said a word. He didn't need to. Within days, Grace's absence from St. Matthew's raised questions. Her story unraveled quickly. Someone had seen her and Peter together once before, out near the highway. Someone else recalled a slip she'd made during a fundraiser meeting, mentioning a time and place that didn't align with church activities. It didn't take much for rumors to become facts, and facts, once exposed, tend to stick. Peter was asked to step back from his church duties. He didn't protest. He stopped showing up altogether. The community didn't shun him with pitchforks, but with silence. Invitations dried up. Small talk vanished. People who once smiled and waved now looked away. Grace didn't fare better. She attempted to return to St. Matthew's the following Sunday. But as soon as she entered the vestibule, conversation stopped. People whispered. Some stared. Others simply turned their backs. She left before the service began. Michael remained steady through it all. He went to work. He restocked shelves. He nodded to customers and offered quiet greetings, just as he always had. But now there was a different look in people's eyes when they saw him. Not pity, not curiosity, but respect. He never told his side of the story. He never needed to. One afternoon, Grace came to the store. She waited until there were no other customers, then approached the counter. Her eyes were puffy, her hands trembling. She started to speak, but Michael didn't look up from the register. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "I made a terrible mistake. I was lost. I wasn't thinking clearly. Michael raised a hand. "You don't need to say anything," he said. "But I'm not interested in explanations. You had choices. You made them." She stood there for a moment, as if hoping he would change his mind. Then she turned and left. She didn't come back again. A week later, their divorce papers were finalized. Michael retained the house and the store. Grace kept their savings. There were no drawn-out battles, no arguments over who got what. She signed everything quickly, almost as if she knew she'd already lost far more than money could repair. Peter tried to reach out once, sent an email through a mutual acquaintance. Michael never replied. He didn't want an apology. He didn't need closure. What mattered had already happened. The truth had come out, and the damage was self-inflicted. As weeks turned into months, the storm passed. Grace moved to a neighboring town. Rumors said she was living with a relative. She stopped attending church altogether. Peter lost his job. Whether by choice or circumstance, no one knew. Amanda filed for divorce, and within a few weeks, Peter was gone too. Michael's life, however, became simpler again. Not because things went back to how they were, but because he didn't carry lies anymore. He didn't talk about what happened, but the people in his community remembered how he handled it, calmly, quietly, with integrity, and that said more than any story could. In the weeks that followed, the impact of the affair rippled far beyond the homes of Michael and Amanda. Peter's downfall came faster than anyone expected. He didn't just lose his marriage. He lost his standing. He'd built a reputation as a man of faith, dependable and involved in every church project. But once the truth surfaced, people who once greeted him warmly avoided eye contact. He stopped getting calls for volunteer work. The church quietly removed him from all upcoming events. And then came the job loss. Peter had worked for a local nonprofit that partnered with churches across the city. Word got around. Leadership didn't say it publicly, but they let him go within a week. It wasn't about morality, they claimed. It was about preserving trust. Peter left quietly, his email deactivated, his desk emptied after hours. He tried to reach out to Amanda again, but she didn't respond. Her divorce attorney handled everything. The process was swift. The house, the accounts, the car, it was all sorted in under a month. Amanda made it clear there would be no second chances. Grace, meanwhile, tried to disappear from the public eye. She moved in with a cousin across town and stayed off social media, but the silence didn't protect her. Word spread. She tried to attend a service at a different church once, but the result was the same. Awkward glances, uncomfortable greetings, and polite coldness that only deepened the isolation. She left halfway through the sermon. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors kept their distance. People didn't yell or insult her. They just stopped seeing her. And in that silence, both Grace and Peter found themselves completely alone. For Michael, the silence was different. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't post online. He didn't gossip. But his calm made people listen when he did speak, and made them notice when he didn't. When asked how he was holding up, he simply said, "I'm moving forward." Nothing more. It became his quiet mantra. Customers began showing up at his store, not just for groceries, but for conversation. People asked if he needed help. A few regulars dropped off homemade meals. The community responded not with pity, but with respect. They had seen how he handled the worst betrayal, and many admired the restraint he showed. One Sunday morning, after the final paperwork had been filed, Michael walked into St. Matthew's and took his usual seat. Conversations around him lowered slightly. A few heads turned, but no one said anything. Then something small happened. A woman from the parish committee walked over and sat next to him. She nodded. "Glad to see you here." That was all, but it mattered. The church never held an official meeting about the scandal. They didn't need to. Grace's absence and Peter's dismissal from all activities spoke louder than any announcement. Amanda, on the other hand, became more involved. With her calm presence and steady voice, she began helping lead community events. The same people who had once admired her as Peter's quiet wife now looked to her as someone who had endured something public and humiliating and come out stronger. Michael and Amanda didn't speak for a long time, not out of tension, but mutual understanding. They had both lived the same betrayal from opposite sides. There was nothing left to explain. But one afternoon, months later, they bumped into each other at a local hardware store. The conversation was short, mostly practical. But when Amanda asked, "How are you doing, really?" Michael gave a genuine answer. "Better than I thought I'd be." She smiled. "Same." They parted without plans, without promises. But the moment lingered. As for Grace and Peter, their stories grew quieter by the month. With no community to support them and no reputation to lean on, they faded from local conversation. Occasionally, someone would mention spotting one of them at a bus stop or a clinic or an out-of-town grocery store. But those stories never lasted long. No one missed them. No one defended them. The affair that once dominated whispers around church pews and grocery aisles had become a closed chapter. One that people remembered, but didn't need to revisit. Michael didn't rush to rebuild his personal life. He focused on what he could control: his store, his health, his friendships. On Sundays, he still took his seat at church. He still helped set up for events. He still smiled and held the door open for others. But now people looked at him differently. Not as a man who had been cheated on, but as a man who had stayed calm while the storm raged, who had walked through humiliation without shouting, and who had chosen dignity over drama. That was the difference, and that was what stayed with people long after the gossip had faded. Months passed, not quickly, not slowly, but enough for life to settle into a new shape. Michael had stopped marking time by what had happened. He no longer flinched when someone mentioned Grace or Peter. The shock had faded. The betrayal no longer defined his days. His grocery store continued to thrive. Customers came not just for food, but because they respected the man behind the counter. He became unintentionally a symbol in the neighborhood, proof that you could be wronged profoundly and still choose grace over chaos. One morning, a reporter from a small local news blog reached out. She wanted to do a human interest piece about the store and Michael's role in the community. He politely declined. He wasn't interested in becoming a public figure or reliving the past for clicks. His focus was on peace. He joined a book club. He took walks in the evenings. He reconnected with an old friend from high school who had moved back into town. They didn't talk about divorce or scandal. They talked about music, movies, plans for the future. And that was what Michael had been craving most of all: a future. He didn't rush into a new relationship, but slowly he became open to company again. Not out of loneliness, but readiness. A woman he'd known for years, one of his oldest customers, asked him to dinner. He said yes. The evening was simple, honest, no tension, just good conversation and shared stories. They laughed. He hadn't done that in a long time without forcing it. Meanwhile, Amanda began teaching a budgeting class at a local community center. She told a mutual friend it helped her focus on something productive, something that gave others control over their own lives. "It's nice to know I can help people get back on track," she said. She didn't need to say more. Everyone knew where she was coming from. Michael saw her again at a town fundraiser. They ended up at the same table. There was no awkwardness. They talked about the event, the people they knew, the work they were both doing. At one point, Amanda said, "You handled it better than anyone I've ever seen." Michael responded simply, "I just didn't want to become the thing that hurt me." That line stayed with her. She told him later, months down the road, that it was what helped her stop holding on to the anger. Neither of them tried to fix the past. They didn't relive it. They learned from it. Grace, on the other hand, faded from view entirely. Some people said she moved to San Antonio to live with a relative. Others claimed she tried to get involved with another church, but was never fully accepted. The truth didn't matter much anymore. Her actions had already cast her future. Peter left town. His name stopped coming up in conversation. If he tried to rebuild, he did so far from where anyone knew him. And maybe that was for the best. Back in Austin, Michael's world didn't revolve around what had been lost. He had no interest in revenge stories or retribution. His victory wasn't in what he exposed. It was in what he preserved: his self-respect, his integrity, and his future. Neighbors often brought up what he did, how he confronted the truth without spectacle, how he helped Amanda without fanfare, how he didn't retaliate but let consequences fall where they should. People used words like honorable, steady, unshakable. But Michael didn't see himself that way. He saw a man who made a hard choice, who chose to stand still while everything cracked around him, then rebuilt quietly, one day at a time. That's how the story ended. Not with revenge, not with a dramatic twist, but with clarity and closure. The truth had done its work. The ones who lied were held accountable. The ones who stood firm found peace. And the community that once whispered behind closed doors now looked at Michael as a reminder that dignity was louder than any scandal. He didn't need to win. He just needed to be free.